They called security on her before she could even utter a single word. No warning, no explanation, just two officers rushing toward a black woman standing in line holding a first-class boarding pass. The gate staff didn't even glance at her. "And ticket." No need, they simply said, "Ma'am, please step aside," as if she were an intruder rather than a passenger. As she was quietly pulled away, everyone around watched. Not out of protest, but to confirm that she clearly did not belong in seat 1A, not with that skin, that quiet, or that composed look. Yet here's what nobody knew. Not the flight crew, not the supervisor smirking near the kiosk, and certainly not the man who walked in right after her without checking his ID. The woman they nearly removed had not bought her ticket merely for first class. She had purchased something far more significant, and when you discover what that was, you'll see why no one on that flight ever flew the same way again. This isn't a tale about race. It's a story about power, the kind you never expect, the kind they never saw standing right there in front of them. So ask yourself, what happens when the person you try to silence turns out to control silence itself? Who is she? Why didn't she fight back? And what exactly did she come to accomplish? Share your thoughts in the comments, mention where you're watching from, and if you think justice doesn't always need to be loud, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to be here when everything is revealed. The sun wasn't fully up over the skyline when Celia Monroe arrived at the terminal. It was 5:43 in the morning, extremely early even by airport standards, and yet the priority access line was already forming. Celia waited a little apart from it, not because she didn't belong, but because she'd learned early. On that standing too close invites extra attention. She wore a simple blue hoodie, basic jeans, and a pair of sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was tied back in a low bun, and she carried only a canvas tote bag over her shoulder. No rolling suitcase, no fancy luggage, just herself and the quiet determination of someone who had traveled alone many times for reasons far more important than a vacation. Approaching the priority access line, a slim, smartly dressed attendant at the front eyed her with a hint of uncertainty. His name tag read Alex, and although his smile was practiced for customer service, his eyebrows furrowed as soon as Celia stepped forward. "Hello," he said, tilting his head. "This lane is just for executive and first-class travelers." His tone was courteous, but you could sense a bias underneath. Celia didn't waver. She simply showed her digital boarding pass and replied, "I understand." Her tone remained even. Alex's smile faltered for an instant before he quickly scanned the code on her phone. Behind her, a middle-aged man in a blazer with a Bluetooth headset shifted impatiently. Alex glanced over his shoulder at the man, then back at Celia, suddenly feeling under pressure. He clicked a few buttons on his screen and then gave her a smile that barely reached his eyes. "Okay, you're in. Please proceed, ma'am." As she moved forward, Alex leaned in to whisper to his colleague, as if to say, "We thought you were lost." His co-worker let out a short laugh, and Celia kept walking. At security, things only got trickier. Although her boarding pass clearly showed her TSA pre-check status, she was pulled aside for a random inspection. "Random check," muttered the agent as he motioned her to a separate table. Her tote was opened and its contents examined. Small toiletries, a book, a sealed envelope, and a single folder tied with a red string. The agent paused when he reached the envelope. "What's this?" "Legal papers," Celia asked calmly. "Private," he replied. "Are you a lawyer?" he asked while flipping it over. "Not exactly," she answered. After a brief pause, the agent shrugged and let her go. Meanwhile, the line moved steadily for others, men in suits, couples with designer luggage, and an older woman wearing a diamond necklace that caught the light. Celia noticed the trend, but said nothing. She had grown used to the system, scrutinizing anyone who didn't look the part, as if assumptions clung to you like shadows in bright fluorescent light. She made it to the gate well before departure. Gate C9, according to the screen, and settled in a corner of the waiting area. Instead of checking her phone or scrolling through social media, she placed her tote beside her, took out the sealed envelope, and rested it on her lap. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. Inside lay the details of a financial transfer that had the potential to change the course of one of the largest airline mergers in North America. She didn't seem like she belonged in first class, yet she was the decisive factor. A nearby child in a stroller stared at her, and Celia offered a gentle smile. The child's mother quickly averted her gaze and turned the stroller away. Celia sighed slowly and leaned back. A voice over the speaker announced, "Final boarding for Flight 237 to Boston. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate C12. She watched the gate agent handle that flight with ease, smiling at the man carrying a briefcase and waving the woman with a small dog in a carrier. The polite gestures here were like assigned roles in a hierarchy. She was clearly at the bottom, but it didn't bother her. She wasn't looking for comfort. She was there to observe, to test, and to verify something she had suspected. It had been 3 years since she'd received that life-changing letter, a trust fund that required her signature before the next phase of investment in a major transportation company could be set in motion. The law firm handling the process had made an unusual request. They wanted her to travel one of the routes undercover to see firsthand how they treated her. "See how they behave when they think you're nobody," the managing partner had said. And so, here she was. A new announcement broke her thoughts. "Now boarding Group 1 for Flight 1187 to Denver, First Class and Executive Platinum. Please approach the gate." Celia stood and walked toward the line calmly. A man a couple of places ahead looked at her and then at the gate agent, as if checking if she belonged there. When her turn came, the agent barely glanced up. "Ma'am, boarding is for First Class and Executive Platinum only." "Selena," she said in a quiet tone while showing her pass. "Seat 2A. The agent blinked, scanned her boarding pass and managed a smile. "Go ahead." As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt many eyes on her. She didn't fit the typical first-class image. She acted like she didn't need it, and that was exactly the point. Reaching her seat, she sat slowly and gently placed the envelope in the seat pocket in front of her. The man sitting nearby offered a courteous nod before returning to his work on his tablet. The overhead bins slammed shut. The engines hummed to life, and for the first time that morning, Celia allowed herself a small moment of control. Let them keep watching. They had no idea what this flight meant. The engine's hum deepened as the boarding door closed with a final dull thud, a symbolic barrier set up by those in control. She sat by the window, her tote tucked neatly under. The seat before her and the sealed envelope rested flat across her lap like an anchor. The gentleman beside her, wearing a casual grey jacket and fashionable glasses, offered a slight smile and then resumed tapping on his device, clearly preoccupied. As the cabin lights dimmed a bit, the flight attendants moved briskly down the aisle, closing the bins and counting heads, their eyes passing over Celia as though she were an unregistered barcode in a sea of premium customers. One of the attendants, a woman with a neat bun, whose name tag read Jenna, stopped briefly at row 2 to scan both seats. Her expression was neutral, and her smile felt rehearsed rather than genuine. "Good morning," she said with a measured tone. Celia simply nodded politely, receiving no further acknowledgement. A minute later, the lead cabin manager, a tall man named Henry, came by with a clipboard and knelt beside her row, asking for her boarding pass. "We seem to have a seating issue," he said, relaying information from the ground crew. "May I rescan your credentials?" Celia unlocked her phone and displayed her boarding pass again. Henry stared at it a little too long, then said, "Strange, perhaps a system error. I'll note that down." No apology was given, just a vague reference to a glitch that somehow justified singling her out. As he walked away, Jenna returned, smiling too brightly as she announced, "We have updated your record, ma'am. Let us know if you need anything." But Celia didn't reply. Instead, she gazed out the window, watching clouds part and come together like cells under a microscope. She had flown this route before, as a teenager traveling alone to attend a distant funeral, a trip that had taught her the hard way that respect is earned only through endurance, and sometimes even that isn't enough. The memory lingered like a faint mist. Just then, the seatbelt sign lit up once more, and Jenna came back to her row, crouching beside her. "Sorry about this, but your seat assignment has been changed during boarding. Would you mind moving to seat 17D? There's been a request to adjust for weight balance." Celia turned towards her, raising an eyebrow. "Weight balance," she repeated. "That's really the only reason." Jenna nodded, her smile tightening. "Yes, ma'am, it's just standard procedure." Celia looked calmly at her and said nothing before leaning back in her seat. "I'll stay here." Jenna's smile froze on her face. She tried to speak, but before she could, an announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are expecting light turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Celia exhaled slowly. No further attempt was made to change her seat. The turbulence never came. Time stretched on. People dozed, typed, and whispered. Celia sat, quietly, unmoving, with the envelope untouched. The real turbulence, she knew, was only about to begin. And when it did, it wouldn't be from the sky, but from below, as if the ground itself was shifting. The steady drone of the cabin filled the background as passengers slipped into naps, watched movies, or listened to overpriced audiobooks. But Celia wasn't tuning out. She was noting every word, every glance, every deliberately skipped act of service, filing them away in a mental log built over years of noticing the difference between being seen and being served. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of choices. And each one occurring around her wasn't accidental. They were planned, calculated, and even worse, comfortable for those in charge. Jenna returned again later with warm towels on a silver tray, offering them with a polite "here you go" to rows 1, 3, and even 4 behind her. But Celia's row was completely bypassed, with no explanation, not even a glance. The man seated beside her had already buried himself in his work, perhaps too absorbed to notice or too accustomed to receiving comfort at someone else's expense. Celia never asked for a towel. She simply stared silently as the tray floated by like a ghost, ignoring the bustle of the living around her. After about 20 minutes, the scent of freshly warmed bread filled the cabin as first-class meal service began. Metal carts clattered between rows, draped with cloths meant to look elegant, though Celia knew it was all the same routine behind the scenes. Warm plate, serve, and remove. Jenna reappeared at seat 2B with a forced smile and a printed menu. She halted in front of Celia, presented the options with a flourish, and neatly jotted something on a pad. Then, as if Celia were an extra piece of decor on an armrest, Jenna moved past her. The cart continued, no menu offered, no questions asked, and Celia waited until she counted 3 rows being served before clearing her throat softly. Jenna turned to her but did not come close. "Was I overlooked during meal service?" Celia asked evenly. Jenna replied mechanically, "Oh, I wasn't sure you were eligible," with a slight chuckle that barely masked condescension. "These seating assignments can get tricky sometimes." Celia tilted her head and said simply, "I'm fine with it." Jenna hesitated, then checked the manifest again, this time more visibly, as if needing to reassure herself. "Okay," she said briskly. "Would you prefer the herb-roasted chicken or the miso-glazed cod?" Without even looking at Jenna, Celia chose the cod. "Coming right up," Jenna said with a brittle cheer before disappearing again. When the tray returned after 15 minutes, the dish was served cold. The fish was barely heated, the vegetables droopy, and the rice stuck together in a clearly unintentional way. Celia didn't touch her meal. She simply replaced the lid, slid the tray forward an inch, and returned her focus to the envelope, which felt even heavier with each passing hour. Across the aisle, another passenger signaled for a refill. A flight attendant promptly arrived, and Celia observed the exchange, a perfect display of attention and service that she neither envied nor resented. She simply measured it. At 33 years old, she had long stopped wanting to be accepted. Now she wanted to see how people truly acted when they weren't forced to pretend. Then came a moment that set the tone for the rest of the flight. A man, probably in his late 50s, dressed in khaki trousers and wearing expensive headphones, moved down from row 5 and leaned over onto Celia's seat as if it were public property. "Hey," he said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "she's in first class." He didn't even look at Celia as he spoke. She didn't turn or react. She didn't need to. His comment wasn't aimed at her. It was meant as a statement. Jenna laughed softly, though not softly enough. "She's on the list," she said while brushing past him. "Probably a reward redemption or something." The man chuckled, gave the seat a couple of taps, and returned to his spot. Celia stayed still. Her heart didn't race, but she gripped the corner of the envelope a little tighter. She wasn't sure if speaking up would have kept her calm. It might have shattered that calm needed for what was coming next. Later, during the cabin cleanup, another attendant, a young man who clearly was still learning the ropes, came by and reached for Celia's tray. He paused and asked in a timid tone, "Did you not like the fish?" Celia shot him a polite but unreadable look. "It was cold," he muttered, apologized quietly, and then pocketed his order card. A few seconds later, Celia noticed him whisper something to Jenna, who immediately glanced back toward row 2 with an expression that wasn't remorseful but rather irritated. Celia noted it, and Jenna never smiled again for the rest of the flight. Eventually, the captain's voice came over the speakers announcing the plane's descent. Most passengers were dozing or absorbed in their headphones, but Celia stayed alert, refusing to trust the ease of the situation. Jenna passed by once more, checking seatbelts, and when she reached row 2, she glanced down at Celia's tote on the floor. "Just a reminder, all personal items must be stowed in the overhead bins during landing." Celia looked evenly at her and said, "I've flown before." Jenna didn't reply and simply moved on. As the wheels touched down and the cabin shuddered, gently, Celia's hand went back to the envelope, aware that the key moment was near. She hadn't had to say much. Every action they'd taken, every skipped service, every towel withheld, every quiet rule tweak, every sidelong glance and hushed whisper had spoken volumes already. As the plane taxied toward Gate 32, that cold, measured confirmation pulsed in her ears. She waited until the seatbelt light turned off before reaching into her tote and pulling out not just the envelope, but something else as well. Celia didn't rush. While passengers gathered their belongings and jostled in the aisle with laptop bags and duty-free totes, she remained seated, sliding the envelope into her lap with the care one would use for a priceless artifact. The seal was intact, the red wax emblem faintly shining under the low cabin light. She noticed a small movement, a glimpse of Jenna near the front of the cabin, watching her without any pretense. The facade of customer service had vanished. The flight was over, the performance had ended, leaving behind only the tension of a power struggle that was still unfolding. After the aisle cleared a little, Celia stood, With her canvas bag slung over one shoulder and the envelope in hand, she walked slowly and purposefully toward the aircraft exit. The captain, following protocol for first-class deplaning, was smiling at the other passengers, thanking them, nodding politely. When Celia reached the doorway, his smile faded a bit. "Safe travels," he said after a pause. Celia nodded, not returning the greeting. She stepped onto the jet bridge, greeted by cool air that signaled a change. Midway, down the corridor, a uniformed airport officer stepped into her path, clipboard in hand, an earpiece snug. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. Celia didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied. The officer gave a polite nod. "We need to verify your final destination before releasing your luggage. It's just a routine check." Celia's lips twitched in disbelief. "You need to confirm where I'm going?" she repeated. The officer consulted his clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. It appears your reservation was reclassified under a flag code 19B, requiring an internal override." Celia stepped forward and asked sharply, "Who put in that code?" The officer hesitated, replying, "It doesn't say." "Maybe it was automatic," she suggested. "It wasn't," he answered flatly. "Please follow me to see who's handling this." He led her down a narrow hallway lined with storage doors and industrial carpeting, the sterile smell of disinfectant heavy in the air. At the end was a small room marked Operations Holding 3B that stood open. Inside, at a desk with 2 monitors and a printer, a woman in a black blazer, her name tag reading Ground Liaison Supervisor, addressed her crisply. "Ms. Monroe, we have detected an anomaly with your record. Your seat was reassigned mid-flight as our system flagged your reservation as ordinary, possibly due to an accidental upgrade." Celia gently set the envelope on the desk, not opening it yet. "What makes it irregular?" she asked. The supervisor tapped on her keyboard and said, "It appears the ticket originated from an old voucher tied to a retired loyalty program that our current system no longer recognizes." Celia raised an eyebrow. "So your system doesn't even recognize its own assets?" The supervisor paused and explained, "Old programs can be manipulated. There have been issues with fraudulent resellers." Celia absorbed the professional phrasing, then said, "So you're suggesting I fraudulently boarded a seat I paid for?" The supervisor straightened slightly. "We're not accusing you of anything, Ms. Monroe. We're just trying to safeguard our operations." Celia stared at her before reaching into her tote and pulling out a black leather wallet. She removed a slim card and placed it beside the envelope. It was embossed in platinum and bore a serial number meant not for banking, but for identification. The supervisor blinked and asked, "What is this, some form of access?" "Level 4 clearance from Eastern Financial Group," Celia replied. The officer next to her stiffened and the supervisor frowned. "That's an investment firm." "No," Celia said calmly as she opened the envelope and produced a single-page document with crisp, shimmering letterhead. "This is the parent company that owns 41% of your airline's merger shares. It is a binding disclosure agreement, and I am the final witness required before compliance can be released." The room's energy shifted, as if the tension itself acknowledged that the person they tried to dismiss held the key. The supervisor's mouth opened slightly. "I was told—" "Certainly not," Celia interrupted, "because this flight wasn't about public announcement. It was a real-world test, an anonymous check from the only person authorized to approve the trust release clause. I'm here to verify, not to enjoy VIP treatment." Silence fell as the operations agent shifted his stance, rethinking everything that had happened over the past 6 hours. The supervisor straightened again, this time formally rather than authoritatively. "Ms. Monroe, we would like to offer—" "No," Celia interjected firmly. "You won't offer anything. You'll document everything." Turning to the officer, she asked, "Where is my bag?" He stammered, "It's in holding bay D2, Mum. I can escort you." Celia nodded, picked up the envelope and card, and left the room without another word. The hallway felt colder now, and the sterile air pressed against her skin. The officer trailed behind, speaking quietly into his radio as they headed to the baggage claim. When they arrived, the carousel was empty. In a corner, her canvas bag had been set next to a steel bin tagged "Unverified Item, Limited Access." She picked it up silently. A zipper was half open, so she checked the folder inside. It had bent pages, touched, but not missing. Looking at the officer, she asked, "Was this opened?" "I don't know, ma'am. It shouldn't have been," he replied. She zipped the bag up and slung it over her shoulder. "Get your supervisor," she instructed. The officer nodded and moved away. Celia then turned to face the far wall, where a narrow window showed the runway. Planes were taking off every 3 minutes. Everything outside appeared orderly, but the real shift had already begun beneath the surface. Among the scripted smiles, the controlled gestures, and the calculated exclusions. She knew she couldn't change the system in one flight, but she also realized that the hallway outside the baggage area, with its grey walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and lingering scent of cleaning chemicals, was a constant reminder. Standing, alone with her bag over her shoulder, she gripped the strap tighter than she expected. Her breathing was steady, but her mind was focused intensely. Soon, she heard footsteps before she saw him. Rounding the corner briskly was a man in a crisp navy suit, wearing a silver badge reading "Ethan Fisher, Own Manager." He extended his hand, but Celia didn't take it. Instead, she gave him a look that was not hostile, merely unwelcoming, and said, "You opened my bag." Ethan's smile faltered, then reappeared with a professional polish. "We had to check that the item inside wasn't a safety risk," he explained. "It is a sealed envelope with a legal mark," she countered. That itself was flagged as a safety concern. Ethan gestured toward a nearby private room. "Would you mind stepping in so we can clear a few things up?" Celia didn't budge. "Are you trying to control the conversation behind closed doors?" she asked. He blinked and then cleared his throat. "Our system flagged you as a behavioral issue because I refused to change your seat," she said, her voice calm yet firm. Ethan hesitated. "We received a report that your behavior toward the crew was considered uncooperative and even confrontational, and protocol requires us to note such incidents for future reference," he finished. Celia moved closer, locking eyes with him. "You're trying to rewrite what happened, aren't you? Not because I was aggressive, but because I wouldn't back down." Ethan glanced over his shoulder as if looking for an escape rather than a solution. "Look, Ms. Monroe, we can either file an incident report or let this go, but I recommend we de-escalate." Celia's quiet laugh was barely audible. "That's your favorite term, isn't it? De-escalate. You provoke the escalation, and then blame my reaction." Ethan straightened his back, his eyes narrowing a bit. "If you're unhappy with how this was handled, you can submit a grievance through our guest relations department." Celia's expression didn't change. "You mean the very same department that filed a false report just minutes after I landed?" His phone buzzed, and after a quick glance he murmured, "Excuse me," before hurrying away. Celia watched him vanish around a corner, then exhaled slowly and found a seat in a quiet part of the waiting area. The room was nearly empty, just a few ground staff and an older man mopping the floor. She sat down, placed her bag in her lap, and pulled out the folder again. The edges were now bent as if someone had rifled through it with casual arrogance, assuming its contents were worthless because of who they belonged to. That assumption hurt more than the act itself. The certainty that nothing she held could be valued higher than what they assumed about her. Taking out her phone, she opened a secure app linked to a trustee portal. Her fingerprint unlocked it, and within seconds she was reviewing a list of flagged personnel IDs from various airport zones, submitted via anonymous audit reports. Her name appeared once as non-operative passenger with the code 37. She tapped on the report, which was sparse and almost intentionally vague. It listed that she questioned authority, ignored crew instructions, raised her voice slightly, refused to move, and withheld personal documents. None of it was true, just enough to justify their treatment, not as punishment or discipline, but simply to exclude her. Closing the app, she leaned back and rested her head against the cool wall. The overhead speaker called out names for baggage, assistants and paging agents, but none were for her. She wasn't meant to be served here. She was meant to be erased. Their strategy wasn't to confront, it was to slowly wear you down, bit by bit chipping away at your sense of worth with withheld towels, silent menus, misfiled alerts, and cold service. They didn't shout that she didn't belong. They just wanted her to doubt she ever did. Then the double doors on her right opened, and a man wearing a bright vest walked in with a clipboard. "Selina Monroe?" he asked. She nodded. "We've recovered your personal item," he said, holding up a familiar document pouch. "It was left open near a cleaning station. Maybe it fell during transfer." Celia didn't move. "It didn't fall," she replied quietly. "It was taken." The man looked confused, then placed the pouch on a table. "There's no way. To prove it, ma'am, it wasn't logged." "Exactly," Celia said, rising to inspect it. She opened the pouch. Nothing was missing, but the final page of the contract now had a crease, as if it had been folded carelessly. Smoothing it out, she tucked it back in and looked up. Outside, through a narrow window, she observed two flight attendants walking by, one of them Jenna, now engaged in conversation, clearly telling the same rehearsed version of events about the difficult passenger, the disrupted process, and the strict adherence to protocol. Celia watched without anger or satisfaction, but with the same silent resolve they once tried to use against her. Only now she held the truth, and silence, when used correctly, could speak louder than any raised voice. She left the room and returned to the terminal. The gate where she had arrived now served a new flight, with a different agent scanning tickets and chatting with a group of neatly dressed passengers. Celia passed unnoticed, until she didn't. "Monroe, hold on. We need to speak with you. Before you—" a voice called from behind. Celia returned to the aisle with the quiet determination of someone who refused to cause a scene, yet wouldn't shrink away. Her second trip to the restroom went smoothly. No stumbles, no delays, just a basic need after hours on a plane. But once she returned to her seat, Jenna reappeared, her smile gone, and her tone clipped in a way that usually preceded a reprimand. "Ms. Monroe," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "we'd appreciate it if you stayed seated for the remainder of the flight. Movements in the cabin can unsettle nearby passengers," and Celia met Jenna's look evenly. "Is there really a rule against using the restroom more than once?" she asked firmly, yet politely. Jenna hesitated while choosing her words. "Not really, but certain actions, like standing too often during the flight or loitering near the crew, give the wrong impression." "To whom?" Celia inquired. Jenna offered a thin smile. "Let's just say it's best to play it safe." Celia said nothing more, buckled her seatbelt, and stared out the window as the plane began its descent into the city. The seatbelt light chimed, attendants prepared for landing, and the final announcements echoed overhead in a neutral tone. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Celia noticed a shift in the crew's posture. Jenna kept glancing toward the front, and another attendant exchanged a look with her near the galley, a brief nod and a quiet comment over her headset. Celia's jaw tensed as she recognized the procedural language, which wasn't personal, but only made the situation worse. Protocol didn't need harshness to hurt. It just needed permission, and that had been given freely. When the plane reached the gate, the seat release chime barely sounded before two uniformed figures stepped into the cabin. They weren't police, but they wore airport security badges, a subtler form of control, discreet yet firm. They moved through the rows as if checking off a list, stopping directly at row 2. "Ms. Monroe," the taller officer said in a professional yet kind tone, "please come with us for a quick verification." Celia didn't immediately move. "Is there an issue with my documents?" she asked. "No, ma'am," the second officer replied. "We have a report about your behavior on board." "It's just a quick check, really," the taller officer added. "What kind of report?" she asked, her tone steady. There were concerns about excessive movement during secure phases, reluctance to follow seat instructions, and some interactions that came off as confrontational, he explained. Slowly, Celia stood. "So I'm being held for going to the A restroom and for not being ignored?" "No one is being detained," the officer assured. "We're simply doing a soft screening." The words were chosen carefully to sound harmless, though Celia knew better. She reached for her tote from under the seat, noticing that Jenna watched her with an expression of feigned concern and little regret. The other passengers pretended not to notice, though a few looked over casually while recording the moment. With their eyes, Celia slung her tote over her shoulder, pressed the envelope tightly against her side, and followed the two officers down the aisle and off the plane. The jet bridge was quiet, except for the echo of their footsteps. Outside, terminal lights shone bright white through the observation windows. One officer stayed slightly ahead while the other walked alongside her. There were no handcuffs or forceful gestures, just a gentle guiding through a space designed to look polite while asserting control. They stopped beside a service door near a cleaning station. "This way," one said, opening the door to reveal a private corridor with grey walls and signs usually seen only by staff. At the corridor's end was a small room with frosted glass, 2 chairs and a desk. A woman in a blazer was already seated, typing on a monitor. She looked up as they entered. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Officer Dana Banks, the liaison for post-arrival screening. May I see your identification?" Celia reached into her bag and handed over her state-issued ID and boarding pass. Banks scanned them, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard as a screen loaded. "There's a note logged by flight staff. Not a formal report, just an internal flag stating you resisted cabin protocol and made others uncomfortable." Celia leaned forward slightly. "Did they say which passengers?" "No, ma'am," Banks said. "And for privacy, they aren't required to. So the complaint is anonymous?" "Yes," she replied. "And I have no chance to defend myself before I'm taken to a holding room?" Banks paused. "It isn't a holding room, ma'am. It's a courtesy screening space." Celia gave a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your language is impressive," she noted. "You make this sound almost like a hospitality service." Banks offered no answer. The door opened again, and a man in his early 40s entered, a suit without a tie, carrying a folder and looking exhausted. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Paul Bennett from Guest Operations Oversight. I've reviewed your incident log and need to clear up a few items with you directly." "Incident?" Celia asked. "Yes, about using the restroom and declining a cold meal," he replied, nodding in discomfort. "I believe that is where the note originated, but the wording in the report set off certain automated protocols. Terms like uncooperative and challenging verbally trigger extra scrutiny," he explained. Celia fixed him with a steady look. "So your system punishes the tone of my voice rather than what I actually did?" He hesitated. "It measures signals," he began, but Celia interjected, "Does your system record that my meal was delayed on purpose, that my seat change was challenged during the flight, or that I made others feel uneasy?" "None of that is noted." He said it in a low tone, Celia reached into her tote and withdrew the envelope again. She didn't open it. She just placed it on the table like a silent statement. This document could affect every contract your airline has with 3 regional financial partners, she declared. I suggest you stop paying attention to signals and start checking the facts. Bennett looked down at the envelope while Banks glanced between them. The air in the room grew thicker, as if before a storm. Celia crossed her legs slowly and deliberately, her voice cool and clear. You've taken the wrong person off the flight. For a long moment after her final sentence, the envelope sat on the desk like a quiet warning, her voice steady, not angry, not panicked, but measured and unsettling in its calm authority. Bennett glanced at Officer Banks, who kept her expression neutral but alert. No one in the room dared to speak first. Finally, Celia reached into the inner pocket of her tote and pulled out a second, smaller envelope, sealed with red wax that shimmered softly under the fluorescent lights. Placing it carefully beside the first document, she said, "This is a signed legal order from the Eastern Financial Group Governance Board. It grants full override authority against any asset interference, including detainment, document access, or any false classification based on procedural errors." Bennett blinked. "I'm sorry, Eastern Financial Group?" Celia's eyes met his. "You know the name. Your airline's second largest investor is behind this. Read it carefully before handling me again." Officer Banks leaned in slightly, scanning the seal without reaching for it. Bennett hesitated, then gently picked up the envelope and inspected the insignia. His eyes narrowed when he saw the micro-engraved serial code in the wax. "Is this current?" he asked. "As of this morning," Celia replied. "The moment your crew tried to reassign my behavior, the order was now in effect." Bennett set the envelope back down with care, as if it were something sacred or explosive. He took out his phone, typed quickly, and looked at Banks. "Can you notify Terminal Command? We might need to suspend further action here." Banks nodded and exited the room silently. Celia leaned back. "I assume you've already entered my details in your incident system," she said. "Whatever codes you used, 37C, 82B, they won't hold. In fact, from now on, your entire regional system is under review for how these codes get assigned. Pattern matching, demographic profiles, and personnel history." Bennett rubbed his temples. "That's handled through another channel." "And that channel," Celia replied, "now has my digital signature authorizing external audits." Her phone, set to silent, vibrated once. She unlocked it, tapped an app, and turned the screen toward him. A message appeared. "Directive relay active. Override status confirmed by trusted command." Bennett swallowed hard. "This is more than just an airport issue," he murmured. "Yes," Celia said calmly. "It goes wherever the pattern leads." At that moment, the hallway outside burst into activity, footsteps, voices, and a phone ringing too long. The door opened once more, and Officer Banks returned, her face visibly different, more tense than before. Behind her was a second officer, older and clearly in a higher role, wearing a communication earpiece and holding a clipboard. "Ma'am," he said directly, "we've just received an urgent notice from our central legal team. You are to be released immediately with no further questioning. All pending classifications are suspended retroactively." Bennett stood quietly, asking, "Who authorized that?" The officer didn't flinch. Her directive was official, accompanied by a parallel note to the regional security vice president that read, "Cease all operational actions with passenger Celia Monroe. She is under corporate protection and holds an active fiduciary role." Celia didn't smile or boast. She simply stood up with quiet precision and reached for her envelope. The officer stepped back to let her pass. Bennett tried to speak. I didn't know," but Celia interjected, "You never asked." And that was the root of the problem. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Turning to Officer Banks, she asked, "Am I free to return to the terminal?" "Of course, ma'am," Banks replied promptly. "Would you like an escort?" "No," Celia said. "I prefer some distance." She moved past them at a steady, deliberate pace and opened the door herself. Outside, the corridor was no longer empty. Two airport administrators were already huddled near the security office door, talking quietly into their phones. One of them made eye contact and immediately stepped aside. Celia walked past without a word. Her heels clicked softly on the tile floor, a calm beat amid the chaos that was now rippling through the terminal systems. In seconds, her name was being removed from many internal watch lists. Automated notices were sent before local teams could react, and a global compliance alert was issued, flagging any further action against her without direct clearance from the executive board. As Celia rounded a corner toward the main concourse, she saw a change in posture near Gate E. Uniformed staff moved with hurried energy. A woman in a blazer whispered into a headset near the check-in area, while someone furiously tapped on a control panel behind the counter. Every gesture confirmed the same fact. The system had caught up with her identity and was now desperately trying to undo what it had done by rewriting its behavior in real time. She stopped at a digital kiosk, pulled up her reservation, and watched as her original first-class ticket reappeared, complete with priority status and updated access to every lounge. Her name had been cleared, but the mark was on them. Behind her, a voice rose from the boarding area. "Wasn't she the one pulled from the flight earlier?" a passenger asked. "Yes," another replied. "Now they're fixing her seat." Celia didn't look back. She didn't have to. She moved forward, her presence now setting the tone instead of disrupting it. As her phone lit up with an encrypted message marked "Confidential Compliance Response Activated," she reached into her tote one last time. Celia pulled a small hard case from her bag and unlocked it with her fingerprint. Every step she took was measured and deliberate. Inside was a secure mobile terminal, lightweight with strong encryption, not available to regular travelers, but reserved for high-level fiduciary agents. She powered it on with a brief scan and began the process with practiced ease, her thumb triggering a silent notification to the Origin Financial Group transaction monitoring system that her identity was confirmed. Within seconds, the system responded with a green light pulsing in the corner of the screen and a message: "Stakeholder ID 9903, A recognized, transaction authority unlocked." Celia didn't smile. She didn't need to. That response wasn't just a check, it was a digital stamp of authority. At that exact moment, in a sunlit conference room filled with financial tension, 3 executives from the Airstream Acquisition Committee stared at the blinking notification on their dashboard. A trusted executive contact had been activated, Origin Financial Group Transfer Authority. They all understood what it meant. The merger worth $4.1 billion, which would reshape regional ownership of the airline, needed the signature of the last living heir to the founder's estate. A signature they had never expected, until final compliance meetings in the following quarter. That heir was Celia Monroe. She passed by the VIP lounge with the same unreadable, steady expression she had held all morning. Now every scanner she encountered recognized her credentials immediately. No more red warning lights, no more delays or confusion. Every system responded before she even reached out. The gate assistant glanced at his tablet and promptly straightened. "Ms. Monroe, would you prefer a private suite or access to a boardroom?" he asked without delay. "No, just open a terminal and connect me to your compliance officer." "Full access," she replied. He nodded while already tapping on his device. Behind her, voices whispered among those who had once thought her silence was weakness. "Wait, who is she?" someone murmured. "I thought she was just a regular passenger." But that label now meant nothing. The security alerts, the flagged documents, the tampered papers, the accusations of being a problem, they weren't just mistakes. They were now huge liabilities, and the person they had underestimated was no longer anonymous. Celia had become the final verifier of a transaction that, if not signed within 72 hours, would cancel an exclusive rights clause that Airstream had been pushing for since the first quarter. The issue wasn't simply that she had power, it was that the airline had treated her like she had none. At 9:04 in the morning, a call was placed directly from the Origin headquarters to Airstream's legal department. The male voice on the line was precise and clipped. "We understand that Ms. Celia Monroe was subjected to improper behavioral profiling under your tracking system. As of now, Origin Financial Group is halting all progress on the capital realignment package until an internal risk memo with accountability findings is submitted. Additionally, we are confirming that she is the primary voting shareholder on the secret stake under Origin's trust umbrella." The line went dead before anyone could ask a question. In the background, one of the airline's senior financial officers dropped his pen. "They always said she'd never show up in person," he muttered. "Her stake was supposed to remain hidden under 10 layers of anonymity, until now," replied the general counsel grimly. Back in the terminal, Celia received the expected notification. Risk status override confirmed. Origin holding sync request pending signature. She tapped to postpone it. Not yet, not here. First, she wanted to see if they would proceed on their own. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an encrypted call from L. Westbrook, Director of Strategic Affairs at Airstream Air. She declined the call, letting them feel the full weight of her unavailability, the same weight they had pressed upon her all morning. Slowly, she walked to the East Terminal Lounge, where senior operations met during merger periods. Passing the biometric check without stopping, she entered the glass panel boardroom. Inside, 3 people sat silently, pretending they had not been tracking her location since her name reappeared in the system. At the head of the table, Leonard West stood, trying to summon a charm that never worked on women like Celia. "Ms. Monroe," he said cautiously, "thank you for coming. We sincerely regret what happened this morning and want to make amends." She sat down without being invited, placed the folder gently on the table, and opened it, not to negotiate, but to reveal their own future. "What happened was not a mistake," she said. "It was a reflection. You built a system that mirrors the bias of those who run it. I just gave it the face you never saw coming." Leonard leaned forward, his expression tight. "We had no idea you would travel like this. Had we known, you would have treated me differently." "Exactly," Celia finished. "And that's the problem. No one interrupted you today. No one dared." She pulled out a second document, this one marked with an Origin Holdings watermark and signed by 3 trust administrators. "This is the conditional hold on our asset absorption plan. If not, reversed by the close of business today, your fiscal quarter collapses. Our partners will pull their hedges and the stock will drop by the end of the week." Leonard's throat twitched. "And your signature is decisive?" "Yes," Celia said, "and so far, I see no reason to sign it." Behind her, the wall screen blinked with a notification. "Incoming update from Audit Logistics, first flagged entity, Airstream Domestic Staff Division, Terminal C." Celia tapped her tablet, and the alert expanded into a live dashboard feed, not just a static report, but a real-time incident trace connected to the surveillance systems in Terminal C and on Flight 447. The audit program, activated silently by her command 15 minutes earlier, had already retrieved data from gate logs, crew communications, scanner records, and onboard cameras. The footage loaded quickly, showing Jenna bypassing her row during towel service, laughing softly after a brief chat with a passenger from row 5, moments before Celia was flagged for movement. The footage didn't accuse, it confirmed. In another panel, the check-in supervisor who had redirected Celia toward the economy line was seen glancing at her name, then dismissing her boarding pass without scanning it, a move recorded by the scanner's inactivity. None of them knew at the time that the system was watching as intently as they were watching her, but now those cameras reported directly to her. Across the airport, in the administrative wing, a phone rang at the desk of Lisa Morgan, the head of Personnel Ethics and Protocol. She answered on the second ring, bracing herself. "Yes?" she said, counting 6 seconds before abruptly standing. "Who?" she asked. "It's her," the voice replied, simply, "Origin." Lisa didn't ask more. She grabbed her folder, left her desk, and sent out an alert. "Immediate compliance review. All staff assigned to Flight 447 report to Ops Room 6A in full uniform." At Gate C12, Jenna was in the middle of her shift, adjusting the jet bridge for an outbound flight when her wrist radio buzzed. "Jenna Carter, report to the admin wing, priority level 3. She blinked in confusion and looked up to find a floor manager already approaching. "Now bring your logbook," he instructed firmly. Jenna followed without protest, though her heart was already racing. Meanwhile, Trent, the check-in supervisor, who had redirected Celia without scanning her pass, was in the midst of rerouting an international transfer when his badge access locked him out. A red message flashed marking "Restricted, pending compliance investigation." Seconds later, a call came in from a nearby wall phone. The manager on the line said no greetings. "Ops Room 6A, please bring your gate activity record. You are being pulled mid-shift." Within 30 minutes, the entire cabin crew of Flight 447 gathered in a closed operations room under overly bright fluorescent lights that seemed sharper than usual. No one was told exactly why they were there, but the presence of a compliance officer, 2 HR representatives, and an IT forensic expert said plenty. At the front, Lisa stood with her arms folded, her face unreadable. "We have initiated a Class B incident review," she announced. "This concerns discriminatory profiling and protocol violations related to a passenger traveling under protected identity status. That passenger has been identified as a strategic stakeholder in ongoing acquisition matters." The room fell silent. Jenna's eyes darted to her colleagues. Trent slumped back in his chair, jaw clenched. One attendant muttered, "Wait, she's a stakeholder." Lisa interjected sharply, "Not just a stakeholder, she is the sole discretionary signatory for Origin Financial, and every interaction you had with her is now being reviewed on synchronized video logs." The screen behind Lisa sprang to life, replaying muted clips of moments from the flight. Jenna skipping over Celia's towel service, a hushed whisper near the galley, and the clip of Jenna trying to reassign Celia under the guise of weight balance. Each clip was dated, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with the service logs and seating data. Then internal communications were heard, where phrases like "confusing guest," "probably upgraded on points," and "not really first" class were casually exchanged among staff on a closed channel. "These aren't service errors," Lisa said firmly. "These are behavioral patterns." Trent suddenly stood, protesting. "Nobody told us who she really was." "That's the point. You're not supposed to need to know," Lisa replied. Another clip played, showing Trent holding Celia's boarding pass, glancing briefly, then returning it without scanning. That move triggered her profile flag. The IT specialist added, "Your override froze her access and activated the compliance alert. She was traveling under protected identity status. Your failure to validate her pass set off the manual review protocol you tried to use." Trent opened his mouth again, but Lisa wasn't finished. "Furthermore, your incident reports were escalated without proper approval. That's a breach of chain of command and a falsification of behavior classification." The room fell silent again. Not out of confusion, but out of fear, the kind that comes when those who confidently dismissed someone realize they targeted someone not vulnerable, but vital. "Effective immediately," Lisa declared. "Trent. Maxwell, the gate supervisor, is suspended pending investigation." Trent's face turned red. "You can't suspend me without involving the union. They've been notified," he protested. "They've held off their statement until after." "They see the audit," Lisa countered. Turning to Jenna, she said, "Senior flight attendant Jenna Carter is removed from the flight rotation effective immediately. Your communication logs are under ethics review, and all other staff are on hold pending evaluation." No one moved. No one objected. What played on the screens was not a threat, but a record that quietly confirmed everything. Outside the room, a printer buzzed as the preliminary findings were sent to the legal department. Down the hall, an assistant typed a message into the CEO's inbox with the subject "Emergency Review, Stakeholder Incident, Immediate Board Briefing Required." Meanwhile, in the lounge, Celia saw a memo update quietly sent at 2:42 in the afternoon, not through a press release or a disciplinary note, but as an update in the internal scheduling system. The subject read, "Crew Realignment, Immediate Operational Shift." The memo listed every crew member from Flight 447, from lead attendant to support staff, and each was reassigned to short-haul domestic routes with limited passenger privileges, no premium tier, no international service, certainly no exposure to elite clientele. Although the term demotion wasn't used, the message was clear. First-class privileges were revoked and overseas rotations suspended pending an ethics review. A footnote explained, "These changes are temporary pending cultural retraining." Yet everyone who read the list knew it wasn't temporary. It was a downfall. It wasn't enough to fire, but it was enough to remind them of what they had lost, enough to make them feel it every morning as they reported to crowded gates and budget cabins for passengers who never expected luxurious details. It proved that power can be silent and still absolute. Jenna read the memo during her break in the employee lounge on the far side of Terminal F, where regional crew gathered before boarding. Her uniform was still crisp, her posture impeccable. But her lack of confidence betrayed the truth. She wasn't angry, she was stunned. Somewhere deep down, she had thought it wouldn't come to this, that the woman she'd dismissed would disappear, or accept, or even forgive, having her actions brushed off as routine policy. But that never happened, because this time the passenger was someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. She only had to wait until the system spoke for itself. Celia never sought her out. She didn't need to provoke conflict. Yet, as fate, or perhaps consequences, would have it, their paths crossed one final time. As Jenna walked toward Gate B8 for her first reassigned flight to Milwaukee, Celia, finishing a call at the private concierge counter, noticed the uniform first and then the woman in it. She didn't stop or stare. But as Jenna came within 3 feet of her, their eyes met, and in that brief moment, thousands of unspoken words passed between them. "You said something to me earlier," Celia said softly, her voice calm and unwavering. "You claimed I didn't belong in first class." Jenna blinked once. I... She started, but Celia continued. "Then I looked out of place." Jenna swallowed hard, her throat trembling slightly. "I never meant to agree with you," Celia clarified, her tone not angry but determined. "I came here to buy first class, not just a seat, but the right to be here." The words didn't need an echo. They settled in the silence between them with more impact than any shouted claim ever could. Jenna couldn't reply. She simply stood there, all her memorized protocols rendered useless. Without waiting for a response, Celia gathered her case and walked steadily toward the northern wing, where a private exit led to executive transport. She didn't need to join a boarding group. She wasn't catching a flight. She was preparing for her next board meeting. Behind her, Jenna watched her leave, arms stiff at her sides and her mouth slightly open as if the apology she had rehearsed vanished. The terminal continued its busy rhythm, indifferent, but to Jenna the silence Celia left behind spoke volumes. Without outbursts or scandal, but through the consequences, the structure, the cold reminder that from now on, the woman she tried to push aside now dictated the routes Jenna could no longer fly. Upstairs in the executive offices overlooking runway 2R, a meeting was in progress. The blinds were partly drawn, and the people inside clearly looked unsettled. Several spoke into phones while others read from printed briefing packets marked Confidential Stakeholder Incident Review, Level 1. At the head of the table, the CEO sat pale and silent as an assistant placed two final documents before him, one a summary of the internal investigation, the other a one-line email from Origin Holdings. Stakeholder Celia Monroe has chosen to proceed with merger conditions under revised compliance rules. All terms are now effective immediately. There was no drama, no elaborate speech, just the undeniable force of justice landing like a delayed flight, inevitable, final, and echoing quietly down every corridor it touched. If this story made you stop, reflect, or feel something deep, please like and subscribe for more narratives that challenge the norm. Which moment struck you the hardest? Was there a turning point you never saw coming? And most of all, where in the world are you watching from? Share your views in the comments below because your perspective matters.